Hello, hello, fearless listeners. Are you ready for another episode of Let Fear Bounce? It's the podcast that's all about conquering challenges and facing our fears. I'm your host, Kim Langling, and each week we'll dive into inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical tips to help you turn your fear into your greatest ally. So sit back, relax, grab that cup of coffee, and let's discover how to make fear our bouncing board towards a life filled with endless possibilities right here on Let Fear Bounce. Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Let Fear Bounce. This is Kim Langling, your host, and I'm so happy that you decided to spend just a small part of your day today with me. And my special guest today, Sarah Westbrook, is the founder of Westbrook Counseling Services and Daisy Girl Communications. She is also an author, and the name of her book is called Trauma Bonded. Now, after a dysfunctional and abusive Mormon upbringing, Sarah left the religion and began her journey to heal from c-PTSD and the religious trauma of her childhood. She shares her faith transition along with advice for healing from toxic cult-like religious systems on her podcast, Unpacking with Sarah. And also, there's Unpacking with Sarah is an umbrella of many, many things, folks. So you definitely want to check that show out. She's married. She's an Army wife. She's also a mama of 7, and she's just a very, very busy lady. Sarah, welcome to Let Fear Bounce.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Kim.
So we were talking off mic, and I was very honest with Sarah. For all you listeners out there, I was very honest with her. I said, I don't know a whole lot about Mormonism or the Mormon faith. And as someone from the outside, I felt that any question I had might come across as judgmental. And I was just being very honest because I'm bluntly honest. And she said, you know what, judge away, ask away, because we can just dig into it. So I was very thankful to her for her being honest like that too, and allowing me to just be my uneducated self on this topic. Fascinated. And I don't know, concerned of how these religious type of communities, how they begin and why people follow. From me, an outsider, again, it's going to sound judgmental, but I look from the outside and I only see what I've read or seen on television. I'm like, how can these people blindly follow these crazy folks? The prophet, quote unquote. And I'm being as honest as I can be. Share a little bit about what Mormonism is, because it's going to educate myself as well.
Yeah, sure. So Mormonism is a fundamental religious practice. Number one, that we all knew each other in a pre-existence before we came to this life. 1/3 of the heavenly hosts were cast out of this pre-existence. The rest of us who chose Jesus's plan came to earth. Those who are of a darker skin color were fence sitters in this pre-existence, so they got the black skin as a curse. Yes, we're a very racist religion, although we deny it beautifully as Mormons. But Joseph Smith was the founder, and I think it's really important to point out that Joseph Smith was heavily influenced by the time that he grew up in, which is pretty normal. And his family was very into the magical worldview. So divining rods to find treasure. I grew up being told that he dug golden plates out of the side of a hill, and then he had a little Urim and Thummim, which are like a pair of spectacle eyeglass, something or other, that he would read the reformed Egyptian hieroglyphs off of these gold plates, and he read them right off of these gold plates, and he had a scribe write them all down. It wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I found out that what actually happened was he found a really pretty rock on somebody else's property, stuck it in a hat, stuck his head in the hat, and the words apparently appeared magically as long as his face was buried in a hat. So you asked earlier, how do people connect with these types of what appears very insane, very abnormal, and obviously flawed to the rest of the world? And I would say that we as humans, we are mammals, we are herd animals, we crave community. And so in the time of Joseph Smith's day, magical thinking, religious reformation, it was common, it was everywhere. And Joseph Smith had something very unique to offer. He wrote another book of scripture. It is as not Mark Twain, was it C.S. Lewis or Mark Twain? I think it was Mark Twain said it was chloroform in print. I've only
Wow.
read the book all the way through 3 times in my entire life because Mark Twain is accurate. It is boring as all get out. There's a lot of repetitive things. There's a lot of issues with it. It's a book of scripture that in Joseph Smith's time, before we had DNA evidence and archaeological digs and a way to really track societies over generations and generations, we were told that the book was the record of the American people, so the Native Americans, and how Jesus came to visit them after he died in Israel. So a very unique offering that other people didn't have. And the challenge with a lot of these cult-like religions, so I would call Mormonism, I would definitely say they fit the, quote unquote diagnostic criteria to be a cult, although they would all balk at that because they're not necessarily the people are good people, some of the best people I've ever met in my life, the most generous, kind, honest individuals. Your issue is in their little pyramid scheme. These top leaders, I believe, are knowingly taking advantage of those who are actively trying to worship and find Jesus. And you're going to find great people, hard workers. They're not actively, most members are not actively trying to cause harm to anybody. For myself, and I can really only speak about myself, for me, it wasn't crazy. I was told these stories as if they were absolute truth from the time I was an infant. And it took until I entered my professional practice and was thrust into the world of viewing other people's beliefs or lack of religious beliefs and being actually accepting, because Mormons claim they're accepting of all things, and then they don't actually know what that looks like because it's never really been modeled for them. But in my professional practice as a clinician, in order to be effective as a counselor, I had to accept people exactly where they were at, whether or not I agreed with their lifestyle, whether or not I thought that their opinions or their perceptions were based in reality. That none of that mattered. If I was going to connect with them and help them function to their best ability in their life, I had to let go of my preconceived notions. And once that happened, then like you on the outside, I was able to see things very, very differently. And for me, that journey started with recognizing the toxic culture within the church. I started to identify the cult-like tendencies. Part of my CEs was studying cults. NXIVM was a big thing there for a while. And I was like, oh my goodness, how could people, be branded and how do you get so caught up in it? And then I had to take a hard look in the mirror and go, whoa, my religion's doing, not the exact same, but very, very similar. And then I had a client, I had a couple that came to me, and the wife had left the church and the husband had not, and they were on the brink of divorce, and he was stuck in the mud, no flexible thinking, no allowance for diversity within the relationship. And I watched and I was like, this relationship is heading for divorce because the couple cannot connect. They can't be flexible in allowing differences to thrive in their relationship. But before she would let me work with them, she said, I have to know whether or not you're going to be a preachy Mormon counselor like all the other ones. And so I'm going to give you some literature. And if you can respond to that literature in a way that I feel heard and validated and important in this, relationship, this couples counseling and counselor relationship, then I will continue to work with you. And I passed the test, but she gave me something called the CES letter, which is a very short essay, or it was actually a long essay, but a very short book that outlines all of the major historical discrepancies between what we know to be fact and the stories that I had been told my whole life. And as soon as I read that CES letter, it was like a permission slip from a principal that I could walk away from Mormonism. And where that fear was, is Mormonism teaches that if you walk away from Mormonism, you will lose your family in heaven. And there is nothing more important to me in this world than my husband and children. My bio says 7. My husband and I have adopted 2 more since that bio was written. So we actually have 9 older kiddos. So we've got 9 right now. They're the most important people, human souls in existence for me. And so why did I stay? Because the threat of losing what I valued most in the heavens kept me stuck in something that was making me absolutely miserable. Wait a minute, Joseph Smith looked at a rock and a hat to translate the Book of Mormon? That's crazy. That's like schizophrenic level crazy here. It's just not real. That's not how things work. I don't believe in that kind of a thing. And it was that permission slip of, if that's not true, none of it's true. You will not lose your family. I don't need to know what happens after death, but I know that Mormonism is not what happens after death. And that is what gave me the courage to finally cut ties and walk away. And I walked away first.
Let's recap here.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're practicing counselor while still within the faith of Mormonism.
Yes.
And a client pretty much challenged you.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, goodness.
Challenge your counselor, like interview your counselor.
Oh,
Do it.
absolutely.
Good for you. Do it.
Oh.
Yes. She interviewed me. She was like, how are you going to help me? Are you going to be able to not judge me? And if you can pass these tests, I will work with you. Excellent.
Yeah, that's very courageous. And I love people like that.
Yes. And she saved me. So thank you, client.
You began to question before you met this one woman who challenged you and said, "Hey, I want you to read this letter."
Almost a decade.
So for about 10 years then, you were questioning, really, what is this all about? And how do I fit in here? And should I fit in here? Did you question those in leadership? What is that called within your family? What is it that's called? Your church? Do you just call it church within the
Yeah, we
church?
do. They call it, we are the church.
Ah,
Because
capital THE.
Mormons, right. So Mormons have rebranded. They were always, the name of the church has always been the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They got a nickname of Mormons back when Joseph Smith started it, 1800s, early 1800s. Then the current prophet, Russell M. Nelson, rebranded everything back to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And now Mormons will oftentimes get very offended when you call them by their nickname, because the prophet, about 5 years ago, Prophet Nelson, told everybody that if somebody uses the word Mormon, it's a victory for Satan, and that we need to stop using that term, and that if you're utilizing that term or allowing others to use that term, you are sinning. We are the one and only true church upon the earth. Everybody else is flawed. We are the only people who know, and we are known as the church. Did I question the leadership? Well, yes. But in Mormonism, which is common for cults, it's a sin to question your leadership. You are to blindly obey. And if they are wrong and you mess up your entire life because they are wrong, they're going to be held accountable for it.
Are women held in lower regard within this church?
Mormonism will say no. In fact, that was a big hoopla a couple weeks ago. One of the female leaders said, I know of no other religion where women have as much responsibility and rights and equal whatever as Mormonism, except that a woman cannot make a single decision that affects or impacts her little flock of whatever she's over. So like, for example, I served as a primary president for about 3 years. Primary president means I was in charge of all of the children age 11 and younger in our little ward. A ward in Mormonism is based on your geographical location. You do not get to choose your congregation. in Mormonism, you go to a specific congregation based on where your address is. I was in charge of this. I had probably anywhere from 80 to 120 children under my stewardship, but I could not make a single decision for that program without running it by my bishop, who is the equivalent of a pastor or a priest. And if he told me yes, then I was good to go. So I had all these ideas, but I didn't get to enact any of those. And that's the way it goes all the way up to the top. So that cult, we're going to question your reality. We're going to challenge what's real and make you think it. It's very much, it's a gaslighting technique. You see it in cults all the time, which is women, you are equal and just as important as long as your male counterpart approves of whatever it is that you're doing. Oh, and the woman's primary role in this world is to stay at home, raise your kids, have a million babies. So for example, I was told from the time I was little that I needed to get married as soon as I found a worthy young man. So I got married 2.5 months after my 18th birthday, and we're supposed to have kids right away. And I struggled with infertility. So we adopted my first son. I was only 20. It's not common for somebody my age at the age of 20 to be pursuing an adoption. That's a very young age. And then I'm supposed to have as many children as possible, because the more children I have, the better I'm doing in life. And so I'm young, we're broke, and we're having kid after kid after kid after kid. I have 9, and I love them all, but my life is vastly different. I'm one of the few that, because of my husband's military service, the reality that I might be widowed was always very real to me. And so after I had I adopted my oldest 2, and then medical science advanced and I was able to get pregnant, and we had our first biological child. And right after his birth, I went back to college. So when I got married, or before we adopted my oldest, Eric, I had gotten an associate's degree. After my third son, Hayden, came along, I went back to school and finished my bachelor's degree, and went directly from my bachelor's degree into my master's program to become a counselor. And I am so grateful that I did, because before that, my entire purpose was to bake food from scratch, keep a house clean, keep my husband happy, and raise children. Very much stuck in the, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s
Right.
ideal. A lot of Mormons still are.
It's just so far removed from anything that I grew up knowing. So, as someone who was never within any of that, I sit there and I'm like, man, that is just crazy train stuff. But I also know it's not, because if that's what you were born into it, no different. That
Correct.
is your normal. So it's not been so long since you left the church. And you said it was just around or right before COVID. So less than 5 years ago, you left the church, you left. Now, where were your husband and your children at that time?
So my oldest son was disenchanted with Mormonism from a very early age. He didn't like it. Growing up in the military, away from what I would call the Mormon bubble, my children were exposed to all kinds of diversity. So my oldest was, I'm going to say this, but a lot smarter than my husband and I. But also, he didn't grow up in a community that was saturated Mormon. I grew up, all of my teachers were Mormon. The post office people were Mormon. The grocery store clerks were Mormon. The librarian was Mormon. Everywhere I went in Snowflake, Arizona, it was over 80% active Mormon. When I left and we announced that mom was leaving to the kids, so the older 4, the one that struggled the most was my daughter, but for both my son and my daughter, their entire world shifted, because as soon as I left, everybody at church started to treat them completely differently. And we became the family that needed saving. And it was, we're so sorry your mom has been influenced by the devil. And my kids were like, my mom hasn't changed. She just doesn't come to church. Like, she still loves us. She still takes care of us. She still goes to work. She still plays games with us. Like, mom's the same person, but she's a hell of a lot happier.
One of my questions was, what happens when you leave? You were just mentioning how the church was treating your family and talking to your kids differently. And it almost sounds, and this is me as a complete outsider, it sounds like when you said, as soon as you said that, they were like, oh, we're so sorry, your mom, or this, on a
There's that.
negative connotation. It's almost like they're trying to brainwash your kids.
Well, yes, everything in Mormonism is brainwashing. From the time you're itty bitty, you start getting told the stories based on the church's viewpoint, which do not reflect the accurate history that the church has acknowledged is actual factual history. I mean, I didn't hear the truth about Joseph Smith till I was in my late 30s.
Right.
The church knew about how that happened from the very beginning. So, I mean, yeah, they were trying to brainwash, and they also were trying to divide us. My husband's aunt told my husband that he would be happier in the long run if he divorced me and he found a righteous woman, that would be better for my husband and my children. His brother told us that our marriage was doomed because I left Mormonism. I never really had a great relationship with my husband's family. They don't like outspoken, opinionated females, and I am an outspoken, opinionated female. I don't allow men to push me around. That's part of my upbringing. And if you were to read my book, Trauma Bonded, you're going to see a very unhealthy relationship between my father and I, where I had to learn to stand up for myself and not be the scapegoat for everything. And so relationship shift for my husband and I, we almost got divorced. And then the Mormon church got fined. So again, another big story in the news. The Mormon church committed tax fraud, and the SEC fined them like, I don't know, $5 million, I believe. And it came to light that they have almost $200 billion. They're one of the, if not the wealthiest church. They give almost nothing to charity. And so for my husband to discover that they had been dishonest with money, that was his final straw. And that was the event where, and because my husband and I, we both value accountability, transparency, hard work. Like, these are some ethics that our religion, or that our relationship thrives on. And so when the Mormon church came out, the SEC said, you're not allowed to make a public statement saying other than what you signed here. Like, what you signed here says, we were at fault, we're going to pay the fine, and we'll start filing the correct forms. And the church signed that, and in less than 24 hours made a public announcement that it was a misunderstanding, that their accountants had effed up. That was his final breaking point. And at that point, he started looking at the church different, and he walked away about 18 months ago. And he's still very much in the angry phase. We lived in what we call a mixed faith marriage for about 2.5, almost 3 years.
That's a bumpy road.
It was the hardest our marriage has ever seen. And we've been through infertility. We've done military deployments. We survived, if you read my book, we survived 2 marital affairs. We survived some really challenging things. Me leaving Mormonism put all of that other stuff in the dust. Not even close. The challenges that our marriage faced. Those 3 years after me leaving Mormonism are the hardest our marriage has ever.
And now that your husband has left, and I'm assuming you are together,
we are still married.
Do you still live in the same area, or did you move far away? Or
so I left shortly after we moved to where I live now, which is in central Missouri. I left right before the COVID outbreak. So before we started wearing masks, like, COVID was a thing in China, and
right.
It wasn't a big deal. And I was like, hey, I'm out. And then I got this beautiful benefit of, within 6 months of me leaving, COVID shut everything down. And so I didn't have to go to church because there was no church. It was glorious. And then when church started back up after COVID, I just never returned. My husband moved to Missouri. So because of military service and life, I got to central Missouri. We knew it was our last move before retirement. I wanted my second son to start high school and finish high school all at the same school. I moved before my husband. He joined us several months later. And he got to us 2 weeks before COVID hit. We didn't really have much of a religious community here in Missouri. Now, our extended religious community, the friends that we've made all over the country, from our hometowns and whatnot. It's been very interesting to see how all of those relationships have shifted. And I would say of those relationships, very few of them are that have lasted are actively practicing Mormonism. They are either very nuanced, military families who aren't, I mean, God bless the military. Most of the people we ran into in the military are very good at embracing diversity and authenticity. And so we still have most of our military friends, but our strict practicing Mormon friends, those relationships have dwindled.
You know, you've got to live your life and live it the best way that you and your husband know how to do together, and to raise your kids the best way you feel. And, you know, leaving that church was what you felt was right. And then that's what you do.
Family, my kids and my husband, we are more connected now than we have ever been before. We can talk about some really hard things, you know, the drug exposure and the exposure to sex that my kids are facing, like safe sex and unsafe sex and internet sex. I mean, all of these things that kids face today, especially cybercrime and bullying and violence, we can talk about it in a way without that religious hangover, that shame piece that's gone. And our ability to emotionally connect just within our family, it's a complete 180, because I'm no longer expecting my children to fit this mold that is prescribed for them by a religious organization. We're so much happier. We're so much healthier. Things function better. It's a beautiful world on this other side of the Mormon bubble, for sure.
When you wrote the book, did you receive feedback from that or pushback? You said that your book was released in September of 2023. So not that long ago. It's a relatively new book. Have you received feedback from those still within the church?
It's actually been very interesting. So my book is not about Mormonism. It's about my childhood. It is about surviving my father and mother's narcissistic abuse. I mean, Mormonism is definitely a character in the book, because I didn't cut corners on describing how Mormonism shaped my worldview. You know, I got married at 18 because that's what I was supposed to do, not because it's necessarily what I wanted to do. Now, gratefully, my husband and I have grown into our relationship, and I'm grateful that he's my partner. But my book isn't necessarily about Mormonism. One of the things that's really funny is those people who have given me feedback, who are active Mormons, I've had several people reach out. Is this book disparaging against the church? And I've said, in my opinion, no. However, you're going to hear some of my thoughts that might be critical, but it's not disparaging about it, because it's not about the Mormon church. It's about my growing up and learning how to navigate attachments that were heavily influenced by narcissistic abuse. It's my story of survival. It's my story of going from where I was trapped in this ickiness to a healthy functioning adult. I don't even talk in the book about my journey out of Mormonism. I talk about my marriage surviving 2 marital affairs in the book. I don't talk about the Mormon side of things very much. However, the Mormons who are criticizing my book, when you start asking them, well, have you read it? Their answer is, no, I don't have to. I already know that it's disparaging against the church. And really what I've done in the book, what I tried to do was to take the reader and put them into little Sarah. I wanted my reader to look at little Sarah and teenage Sarah and adult Sarah and see the world from the eyes of somebody that has gone through what I went through. Now, I will say that it's a hard read. It is for mature audiences only. This is not a book that I would want my young teenagers reading, but there's also that population of people who have endured much more obvious abuse that will look at what I went through and they'll compare and they'll say, well, your abuse was not that bad. Well, most of my abuse was psychological, emotional, and verbal, not physical and sexual. Now, there was some physical and there was some sexual abuse going on, but not to the extent that a lot of people will start to read that and expect. It's very much about the psychological abuse of a child being raised by an overtly narcissistic father and a covert narcissist mother who couldn't be wrong and therefore was silent. My mother never stood up for me. And so that's what you read in the book, is this dynamic of dad is never wrong. He's always the smartest in the room. It doesn't matter what is going on or what is best for his family. It is his way or no way, and how that influenced my life. I'm very proud of the book. I wrote it very quickly. So the rough draft came out of me once I finally sat down to write it. It came out of me in about 2 weeks. I had the whole book down, and then we spent the next 18 months editing it. And really what it is it's the internal world. It was how I viewed the world and acted in ways that are outside of who I wanted to be. And some of that's because of trauma, and some of that was because I just didn't reach out for help when I knew I needed it. My goal was to normalize the human experience and human frailty, because we need to have more grace for people in struggle. And I think that in today's world, we fail at that because there's this expectation that we are to achieve, to produce, to give, this consumer capitalistic environment, and that we are crushing the beauty of humanity. And I wanted to give some of that back and say struggle is real, recovery is beautiful, and with the right people and the right supports, you can heal. And I can honestly say I'm a much healthier person today than I was in my 20s and 30s, but also I still have a long way to go. But I accept and embrace my frailty as part of who I am. And that as I'm honest with myself, that's how I take my life back. That's how I embrace courage and become my true authentic self. So that's really what I wanted out of the book.
So you are a counselor.
Yes, I am.
Now, did you yourself seek therapy or counseling over these past few years since you left the church?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Counseling before I left the church, counseling after I left the church. I spent, after the marital affair, I spent a little less than 3 years with my counselor. In the book, I believe I called him by his actual name. I'd have to go back and look. His name was Jim. I think he has since passed on. He was an older gentleman. He was in his 60s when I saw him, and it's been many, many years. Jim saved me in the sense of he taught me how to be honest, because before Jim, I was never honest. I was a pathological liar. Over the dumbest stuff I would lie, like just to be accepted. There was always this fear that if I didn't have a story, people wouldn't like me. And it was Jim who helped me say, your stories are stopping you from being likable, because you're not great at lying. So anyway, I'm appreciative for Jim, because he taught me how to be honest with others and how to be honest with myself. You will read about my counseling experiences in the book. I recreated those conversations with what I would tell my clients today. Some of it I learned from those counseling mentors, but most of it, especially my conversations with Jerry in the book, and Luis and some of the other professionals in my book. I took the spirit of what they said or what I learned from them and reworded it to what I would say now. So anytime you're reading the counselor, you're reading the things that I would say to my clients today. And then there's author notes in the book, and I'm going to actually be revamping those and expanding the author notes. I'm hoping to get that project done here in the next 2 to 3 years. But you get author's notes that help normalize things, things like how would a little girl be so abused by her daddy, but then seek his comfort in a time of need. And it's, that's actually very normal for the victims to turn to their perpetrator for comfort, because you get this Stockholm like dependence on them for everything. And so, one of the things I remember my editor reading it and going, why on earth would you climb into your dad's lap and cry at this moment? And I was like, because he had that much power over me. I didn't have anywhere else to go. That was part of the manipulation,
What a
So,
what a what a twisted journey, huh?
oh yes, life is so fascinating.
It truly is. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, you can look back, and I'm often saying, if I look back at the path that I've traveled, just how bumpy and filled with potholes it has been,
Right?
I would not be able to write about the things I write about or do what I do,
Yeah.
So you don't understand why the path is laid out the way it is, but in hindsight, at least for me, I can see certain points in my journey where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, now I see why I do what I do right now because of that
Yeah.
from
Yeah. People
25 years
ask me
ago.
all the time, if you had to do life all over, would you make the same mistakes? And my answer is, if the only way for me to learn the lesson that I learned from it is for me to repeat that mistake, then yeah, I would have to, because I didn't grow up. I didn't, I didn't learn how to be honest with myself. I didn't seek out Jim's help until after I had a marital affair, because I was not in an unhappy relationship when I had that affair. My husband and I were, I mean, as far as we knew, we were thriving. And obviously there was a weak spot in our relationship. And so after I cheated, I mean, I went to a counselor. I was like, what is wrong with me? There is something seriously wrong with me. And the interesting thing is Mormonism kicked me out. They ostracized me. You cheated, you're a sinner. You are being separated from there's this shunning that went on. You're being somewhat separated within your community because you did this. And what I needed in that moment was to be embraced and told, you're human. You made a mistake. We love you. You're okay. This doesn't define you. This isn't who you are. You can recover. Let's help you get help. Let's whatever. I didn't get that from the supposedly quote unquote unconditional, loving, accepting community that I had grown up in. I got shunned and judged and pushed away. And I mean, it was horrible and not private. It's, Mormonism will tell you it's a private shunning. It is not. Small communities, no, they know everything. So it was not that private. And I instead went to Jim, who was a counselor through the military. And he was the one that started gently pointing out where my pathological lying was interfering with me becoming who I wanted to become. And it changed my life in a very positive way. So if I have to cheat on my husband to learn how to be honest, I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but I would absolutely make that same choice.
I think a lot of people, if they look back, if they're addressed with that same question, if you knew now what you knew then or whatever, however it might be worded to you, I think a lot of folks probably would say, yeah, I think I would, because otherwise you wouldn't be who you are today. As long as you're someone that's like yourself, looking in the mirror each day and you just want to be a little bit better than you were yesterday.
Right. If you
And
knew
you're working
now,
your butt off to be a better person and to be a better wife or mom, whatever it is that's in your realm that you're working on. I mean, that's all we can strive for, is to just be the best that we can be in our flawed selves, because there's not a single one of us that's perfect.
right. Well, and my answer to that question, if you knew then what you knew now, would you have chosen differently? And the answer is, I wouldn't know what I know now if I had known it.
Right.
That was the path I took to know what I know
Right.
now. So you can't take my journey away from me and expect me to have the same knowledge. It just doesn't, that's not how life works.
Right.
Know now what I know now. And I'm a better counselor because I know what it's like to be the cheater. And so when I've got a couple in here who are in that level of pain, I can connect with the perpetrator and make them recognize, where their mistake was and how that's affecting people, as much as I can help the wounded partner that was cheated on. And it has made me exponentially a better counselor. I have very high success rates in couples therapy because I don't join in the judgment of the cheating partner because I've been the cheating partner twice with the same asshole. So it's, who does that? Well, I do that.
Takes you a while to learn there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Life kicked me in the butt.
Oh, and
For
it
sure.
will. It will. It'll always catch up to you. Always.
Yeah.
Always. So, do you attend church at all now? Any sort of church?
No, I think that the religious trauma is such that when I walk into a church today and I start, especially Christian religions, and I mean, I don't want to bash Christianity. I don't want to bash any religion at all. But when I walk into a religion and I'm told that you are broken and the only way for you to get better is to have Jesus in your life, it is so off-putting to me because you're not broken. I don't believe that we are broken humans. I don't believe that. I think that all of us are functioning based on what's happened to us. And that's not a broken, it's definitely not effective functioning. Like I will absolutely say, hey, we're not functioning in a way that is who you want to be, but you're not broken. Your brain and body are responding exactly the way it was meant to respond to protect you from being hurt. And sometimes our protective mechanisms actually cause more harm than they do good. So let's learn how to do this differently. I really struggle with religions where you walk in and it is the only way you can thrive is if you outsource your ability to heal. And I believe healing comes from within us. I believe in a higher power. I don't necessarily define that. I believe that the Jesus from the Bible is a real human. I believe that he was a radical of his time. I believe that the Bible that was written about him, it was written, what, 80 years? The first account is 80 or more years from when Jesus wrote it. And I know that after 80 years, the stories have grown and shifted from the reality of what they were. I mean, that's just human nature. If I'm going to write a book 80 years after something happened, the details are going to be off. I believe that we should try and be like the Jesus in the Bible, this loving, accepting person that stood up against social injustice and political injustice. I believe that that's a good person to be, that's a great human to try and model your life after, at least based on the stories in the New Testament. I believe that if the Bible is true, then the God of the Old Testament is really messed up, and I'm not really a fan of the bipolar Old Testament God who's like, oh, you done ticked me off, let me just wipe you out. It sounds like a raging teenager. So not a big fan of that. I believe that the Bible is allegory, that it's symbolic, and that they were fables and myths. Like, humans learn best through stories. And so there were stories created to teach lessons that were relevant for the time that they were written in. So I do believe in a higher power. I'm very spiritual. I find connection with my higher power in taking care of living creatures and the environment. I wouldn't consider myself a tree hugger, but I absolutely believe that we need to take care of this planet, and that as we take care of the planet, it will take care of us. Recently moved my practice to a farm where we have goats and horses, and I've rehabbed dogs for many, many years. And I absolutely love working with nature. That's where I find my spirituality. But as far as a prescribed religion, because of my religious trauma, it's very difficult for me to look past the things I disagree with in any religious community. And most of the religious communities, most of those churches I've walked into, it's, this is the right way and there's no other way. And I'm like, we all walk a different path. I want to honor everybody's path. And I believe that we're all connected in some way that I can't explain. And as I do my best to do good and to heal and connect with everything that's living around me, that's the best I can do. And I'm okay with accepting that. And if there is a big sky daddy that needs me to do things exactly a certain way, well, I think that an all-loving father is going to give me the opportunity and the information I need when the time comes for me to utilize it. So it's very vague. I went from Mormonism, which was incredibly specific, and they knew they had an answer for every question, to I have answers for absolutely nothing. And okay with it.
And you know what? That's fine, because this is your life. This is your journey, and you, as you said several times, you're healing. And to do that means you're becoming healthier,
Yeah.
which in many aspects. So I'm certainly not going to sit here and judge anybody.
Yeah.
I
Um,
love, I love that, just the how that you said you moved your practice to a farm. I love that, because for me, and I often tell people, when I'm outside, that is where I am best able to breathe.
mhm.
So I'm outside as often as I can be. And I live in an area where you experience all four seasons. Pretty sure in Missouri does too.
Where I'm at, yes.
Yours
It's
might be even a little more extreme in the wintertime than mine, but we get
where
pretty
I'm at,
heavy.
we get about 6 weeks of nasty winter. Other than that, it's pretty mild. 6 weeks of nasty summer. The rest of the year's mild, 4 seasons. Tornadoes. We get lots of tornadoes.
We get them too. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're kind of the same with the weather, but I'm out in all of it. Doesn't matter what it is. Me and my dog are out there, and that's what I'm always saying. That's where I'm best able to breathe. And
Yeah.
that's where I have my conversations with God. I am a Christian. And that's where I have my conversations. But I too experienced something within the church that I attended, um, that threw me. And I was a little discouraged. We'll just put it that way. It was quite disheartening and discouraging. And so I have not been back there in quite some time. But I don't feel that I'm, at this time, I don't feel that I'm missing anything.
Mhm.
Um, and I respect your opinions and your journey that you're on right now. I'm certainly not going to judge. I don't want to judge anyone, just like you were saying. Everyone, they have their beliefs. You're not going to put them down for that or judge them for that.
Mhm.
I feel that you've got to walk your own walk.
Yeah.
And in the long run, you're going to know whether it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
I
you know.
think that if your religious beliefs bring you peace and joy, go for it.
Oh,
Because that's,
absolutely. Absolutely. And
I
I can
mean,
honestly say that my faith has gotten me through, positively, gotten me through so much. So much.
yeah,
And I don't believe that, if I saw myself decades ago when I had zero faith, it would be very hard to say that I would be living the way I am now.
right.
So people's faith. And that's why I say, I don't, people are always like, oh, you go to church, you must be religious. And I say, no, I'm not religious. I just have a strong faith. And there is a big difference.
Right.
To me, there's a big difference. So, I commend you.
Well, thank
I
you.
do commend you for standing up for what you felt was right, whether you were on the bumpy road. And it sounds like, you had a really bumpy road. You were born into a thing, a life that the vast majority of us don't understand as outsiders. We just can't fathom it. And that was your normal. And you've come out of that, and you've started a new normal for yourself and your family. And I commend you for that, because that takes courage,
Well, thank you.
tremendous courage, to stand up to something so big, that you were raised in, that was so big. And you said, wait a minute, I don't think this is right. you know that takes a lot of courage, and I'm sure that there was a little bit of fear involved in there, and you faced it and said, I got to walk out this door,
Yeah.
for my own sake. I have to walk out this door.
Right. Well, and I would add that I'm not going to ask anybody to walk out the same door I did. If Mormonism works for you, if it is where you find peace and happiness and joy, by all means, stay. I've known people from all walks of religions and ethnicities. You know, one of the beautiful parts of my job is that I meet people from all types of lived experiences. And I'm a huge proponent of, if it's working for you, you don't need to change it, but protect your joy. Everything that you can do to protect that peace and that joy, do it. I find greatest peace when I'm riding a horse, because if I'm frustrated, the horse won't do what I ask. I have to remain calm. I have to find my rhythm with the animal in order for us to work in tandem. And I feel that that's a huge motto for my life. The goal is not to bring anybody out of a religion or a system that is working for them. Rather, it's to advocate for people to have the courage to make the changes that they feel are necessary to find that peace. And for many, it's to do something similar to me. And there are so many out there that have it worse than me. You know, if
Indeed.
I had financial resources, I've never lacked for food or shelter. You know, you throw in something like extreme poverty, or my husband has never been violent. I've never suffered from domestic violence. I had some sexual abuse in my childhood, absolutely, but nothing like the stories I hear in clinic. So people have had it easier than me. People have had it harder than me. Hard is hard.
Hard,
And
yes. I was going to say hard is hard, and it's your journey. That specific person,
your hard is
you can
hard.
never judge someone else's trauma.
We don't, yeah, comparison, like, right, we call that trauma comparison, or, comparative suffering. I'm going to compare my suffering to your suffering. All that does is lead you to a place of misery.
Yes.
And my podcast is to inform and hopefully inspire other people to make the choices that are best for them. And just move on with life. I love being on a farm and cannot wait to see the fruits of my labors, and we'll just keep plugging along. But yes, protect your peace.
And
Protect your
I think it's incredibly important. I like that. Protect your peace. And I also like, and I want to reiterate that you said you are not asking anyone in anything that you do or have done or written, you've never asked anyone to leave what is working for them. And
right.
I think that's a very important point as we get ready to wrap up. It's a very important point that I want the listeners to take note of.
I hope that people can hear my story or read my book, learn from it, and be inspired to do something courageous and protective for themselves. Beyond that, there's no expectation. And I hope that they can. And if they cannot, that's okay too.
That's okay too, because it's
Story
their
will
journey.
not resonate with everybody, and that is okay.
That is right. Yes, your book will not be for everyone. And I
Not
tell
for my
myself that too.
father,
I'm like,
for sure. Right.
everyone is not my reader, and that's okay.
Correct.
Well, this has been awesome. And I always ask all of my guests right before we wrap up, I ask all of my guests if they would toss out a nugget of hope to the listeners today. So what would your nugget of hope be?
Oh, goodness. My nugget of hope is that as you learn to be truly honest and accountable with yourself, not with anybody else, but just with yourself, that you will find the pathway to become who you want to become. But the only way to do that is to stop blaming the people around you, look inward, and be very honest with yourself.
That's a good nugget. Tough for a lot of people, but a good
Oh,
nugget.
speaking from personal experience, I was not super honest with myself till my early 30s.
Oh, and I think there are points in every single person's life where they are not honest with themselves. I truly do believe that.
Well, and that's our brain's way of protecting us. My
Right.
brain is like, ooh, that's a hard truth. We're just going to leave that one over there and let's pretend. I mean, the brain attaches to the first thing that makes sense, whether or not it's true.
Yeah.
So learning how to slow that process down and be completely honest with yourself. It takes time.
It
But as
does
you
take
do that,
time, but it's worth it in the end.
so worth it.
Yeah. Awesome nugget. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you, Kim.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being my guest today. This has truly been enlightening and educational for me. I mean, I learned a lot, and it's fascinating stuff, actually. So I appreciate all the time that you spent with me today and sharing your truth and your raw honesty. I truly appreciate it, and I enjoyed this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure. Enjoy. You're a very easy person to talk to, Kim. So thank
Oh,
you.
thank you. Well,
Yeah.
everybody out there listening, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did having it with Sarah. All of her information will be in the show notes as well as in the description on the YouTube channel. So feel free to like, subscribe, and share, and all of that jazz. Again, this is Kim Langling, your host of Let Fear Bounce. Once again, thank you so much for spending just a small part of your day with myself and my guest today, Sarah. Everybody be well, stay well, and be blessed. And that is a wrap, my fearless friends. Thanks for bouncing along with me on another episode of Let Fear Bounce. I hope you're feeling a bit motivated and ready to take on any challenge that might come your way in the coming days. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode of Let Fear Bounce. Tune in each week for your dose of inspiration from my amazing guests from all over the world. So until next time, keep bouncing forward and stay fearless, my friends. Everybody be well, stay well, and above all, be blessed.